There's something strange about a person who gets a little too obsessed with Christmas. Most people hang lights, bake cookies, maybe play some holiday music. But then there's the level that Marcus's neighbor, Leonard, had reached. And honestly, it didn't feel festive at all. It felt off. Marcus had moved into his new place exactly 1 week before Christmas. The neighborhood looked warm and cheerful, the kind of suburban street where every house had inflatable snowmen, bright LED lights, and that one neighbor who went way too big with a glowing nativity scene. At first glance, it all felt cozy. It felt safe. But then you saw Leonard's house. Leonard's decorations didn't match the rest of the street. They weren't modern or cheerful. They were old, really old. His entire lawn was covered with decorations from the 50s and 60s. Faded Santa figures with chipped paint, plastic reindeer with one leg barely hanging on, and strings of bulbs that flickered like they were losing power every few seconds. It looked like a museum display that someone dumped straight onto a yard. But the part that really bothered Marcus was the mannequins. There were 2 of them on the front porch, both dressed in Christmas sweaters. Their faces were blank, smooth, and somehow staring even though they had no eyes. The sweaters looked handmade, like someone knitted them with way too much care. At first, Marcus tried brushing it off. He assumed Leonard was just an older man who liked vintage holiday stuff. Maybe it was his thing, no big deal. But on Marcus's first night in the house, he heard something that made everything feel wrong. Around midnight, from the direction of Leonard's backyard, came a soft humming sound. Not like random noise. This sounded like a low choir humming a holiday tune. Slow, gentle, almost like a lullaby. Marcus stood still in his dark living room, trying to convince himself it was just someone playing music outside. But the sound felt too close, too real. He decided to ignore it. The next morning, Marcus opened his front door and found something small sitting on the doormat. It was a vintage Christmas ornament, the kind made of fragile glass, hand-painted, old, and on the top, written in tiny lettering, were the words, "For the good ones." Marcus thought maybe it was a friendly welcome gift from a neighbor. But when he looked across the street, Leonard was standing at his window, just staring. No smile, no wave, no acknowledgement at all, just watching him while Marcus held the ornament in his hand. And that was only the beginning. Every morning after that, Marcus found another strange object on his doorstep. One day it was a cracked angel ornament. The next day, a tiny wooden sleigh with a broken wheel. Then a doll-sized Christmas stocking with his house number stitched into the fabric. The stitching was uneven, like someone did it hand, slowly. By the time Christmas Eve arrived, Marcus was already on edge. Late that night, as he lay in bed trying to fall asleep, he heard something outside his window. Not humming this time, not music, something worse. Shuffling. Slow steps dragging across gravel. He sat up, walked carefully to the blinds, and peeked through a tiny gap. Leonard was walking up his driveway, but he wasn't alone. He was holding one of the porch mannequins by the wrist, dragging it along the ground behind him. Its sweater was gathering dirt, its plastic feet scraped across the pavement with every step. Marcus froze, his breath caught in his chest. Leonard reached Marcus's window, lifted the mannequin upright, and gently leaned it against the glass. Its blank face stared straight into the room. Leonard stared too, his face inches from the window. In a quiet voice, he whispered, "Now you're part of the neighborhood." Marcus stumbled back, heart pounding. He grabbed his phone and tried to call the police, but before he could dial, someone knocked on the front door. A slow, heavy knock, 3 times, then again and again. He ran to the living room, looked through the peephole, and froze. It wasn't Leonard. 3 mannequins were standing on the porch, positioned in a perfect line, their heads tilted slightly toward the door. Their sweaters looked different from earlier, almost like someone had just dressed them. And behind them, barely visible in the darkness, he heard Leonard whisper, "They've always loved meeting someone new." Marcus didn't wait. He sprinted out through the back door, jumped in his car, and drove straight to his parents' house without looking back. He returned a few days after Christmas with officers, but Leonard was gone, completely. His house was empty. The mannequins were gone too. The lawn looked strangely clean, as if someone had taken time to remove every trace of what had been there. All except for one thing. On Marcus's porch was a final glass ornament, hand-painted like the others, but this one had a new inscription. For the ones who got away. Erin had lived in her apartment for 2 years. It wasn't a luxury place or anything special, just a quiet building on the outer edge of town, simple, calm, and predictable. Most of her neighbors barely talked to each other, which Erin didn't mind. She liked her space. But the one person she always noticed, even if she didn't want to, was the woman who lived directly across the courtyard. Her name was Mrs. Dorsey. Mrs. Dorsey was quiet, polite when she did speak, but undeniably strange. The thing people talked about the most was her blinds. She never closed them, not during the day, not at night, not even during storms. Her apartment windows were always wide open for everyone to see inside, and the view never changed. She had a single recliner, a small old TV from what looked like the early 2000s, and in the corner, a plain Christmas tree. The tree stayed up all year long, no matter the season. But the odd part wasn't that she left the tree up. The odd part was that she never decorated it. No lights, no ornaments, no ribbon, nothing. Just a bare tree standing there, like it was waiting for something or someone. Erin tried not to judge. Everyone has their quirks. But that tree always looked out of place, like it didn't belong in a normal apartment. Everything stayed quiet until Christmas Eve. Erin was sitting on the floor, wrapping the last few gifts she had bought for her family. She glanced out her window the way she usually did, half out of habit, and that's when she noticed something strange. Mrs. Dorsey wasn't in her recliner. Instead, she was standing at her window, perfectly still, her hands down at her sides, her eyes pointed straight ahead, not at Erin's apartment, not at the courtyard, just staring into nothing, like she was watching something that no one else could see. Erin shrugged it off at first. Maybe she was stretching, maybe she was checking the weather. She forced herself to joke about it in her head, just to calm her nerves. But a few minutes later, when she glanced again, she froze. Mrs. Dorsey had moved closer to the glass, a lot closer. Her face was almost pressed against the window now. She wasn't blinking. She wasn't shifting her weight. She wasn't doing anything except staring straight forward. Erin felt a cold, uncomfortable pressure in her chest as she stepped away from her own window. Something about the stillness made her skin crawl. Her evening went on normally after that, but the image lingered in her mind. She tried not to think about it, but every time she looked toward the courtyard, she expected to see that expressionless face staring back at her. Around midnight, the snow began to fall, soft flakes drifting down gently, covering the courtyard with a quiet, peaceful layer of white. Erin walked to her window to watch. Snow always made her feel calm.
But the moment she looked up, the calm vanished. Mrs. Dorsey wasn't there anymore. Her apartment, usually brightly lit, was completely dark, every light off, except for the Christmas tree. For the first time ever, after 2 years of seeing it untouched, the tree was glowing. Faint golden light flickered across the walls. Erin squinted, confused. Then she realized what she was seeing. There were candles, dozens of them, all placed carefully around the base of the tree. Their flames flickered unevenly, casting long shadows in every direction. And then Erin noticed the shape. Beside the tree stood a tall figure, thin, upright, perfectly still. At first, she thought it might just be a shadow cast by the candles, but then the shape tilted slightly, as if it were breathing, or listening, or waiting for something to happen. Erin stepped away from her own window, her heart pounding. She tried to steady her breathing. Then her phone buzzed. She grabbed it and saw a message from an unknown number. "Close your blinds." That was it. No name, no explanation, just those 3 words. Her hands started shaking. She looked back toward the apartment across the courtyard. Mrs. Dorsey was standing at her window again, but this time she wasn't facing straight ahead. She was staring directly at Erin's window. Her silhouette was tall, but something looked wrong. The light behind her stretched her shape in a way that didn't match her real height. Her shadow seemed longer than her actual body. And the tall figure beside the tree was leaning slightly forward now, as if it had turned its attention toward Erin too. Erin snapped her blinds shut and backed away from the window. She sat in bed the rest of the night, fully awake, listening for anything, a noise, a knock, a voice, anything. But the night stayed silent. The next morning, Erin woke up to the sound of voices outside. She opened her door and saw police cars and an ambulance parked in the courtyard. A small crowd of neighbors had gathered. Mrs. Dorsey had been found in her recliner. The officials said she had passed away sometime during the night, peacefully, natural causes. But when Erin looked at the apartment from outside, something didn't add up. The tree was gone, the candles were gone, even the recliner had been moved from its usual spot. When the officers opened the blinds, the inside looked empty. Not like someone had lived there yesterday, more like someone had moved out months ago. There was no Christmas tree, no candles, no tall figure, and no sign that anything had ever been there at all.
This one comes from a guy named Tyler, who spent Christmas Eve at his uncle's cabin last winter. The place was about as peaceful as you could imagine. Heavy snow, icy air, and the kind of silence that makes you feel like you're the only person on Earth. The nearest neighbor was an elderly man who lived about 300 feet away, someone known around the area as Mr. Harlow. People said he was quirky but friendly. He made his own wooden Christmas decorations every year, old-fashioned cutouts of Santa, toy soldiers, elves, reindeer, all hand-painted in bright colors. From a distance, they looked nostalgic and charming. Up close, though, something about the style always felt slightly off, like the expressions were painted a little too carefully. The first night Tyler stayed at the cabin, he noticed something strange. Every so often, he heard crunching sounds outside. At first, he thought it was just wildlife, maybe deer or foxes moving across the snow. But the pattern didn't match animals. These sounded like slow, heavy footsteps, the kind someone in boots would make. One step, then a pause, then another. Each time he built up the nerve to check through a window, he saw nothing but empty snow. Christmas Eve was when things escalated. Around 11 p.m., Tyler went to wash his face before bed. He leaned over the sink, splashed cold water on his cheeks, then casually glanced out the bathroom window. He froze. Fresh snow had fallen earlier, untouched and perfectly smooth, but now across the yard was a line of footprints, a single straight path. They came from the tree line, dark woods that bordered the cabin, and led directly toward the porch steps. There were no wandering tracks, no detours, just a straight line, like something had been walking with purpose. Tyler hurried to the front room and yanked open the cabin door. The prints ended at the welcome mat, but there were no prints leading away, just one path that stopped right at the front door, like someone had walked straight up and never left. He shut the door quickly, locking every bolt. A moment later, something tapped the window. 3 slow taps, crisp and deliberate. It sounded like knuckles hitting the glass. Tyler grabbed his uncle's old flashlight and scanned outside. The snow was falling harder now, blowing sideways across the yard, making it difficult to see. But the moment the beam reached the woods, he noticed something. One of Mr. Harlow's wooden toy soldiers was standing at the tree line, except Tyler was sure it wasn't there earlier, and it looked taller than he remembered any of the cutouts being. Taller and positioned so that it faced directly toward the cabin, its stiff painted stare fixed on the porch. Tyler blinked, took a step back, and aimed the light again. Had it always been that close? The wind pushed the snow sideways, making everything blurry. He convinced himself he was imagining it. Then came another tap, much louder. Tyler spun around, shining the flashlight toward the back window. A tall shape stood there, human-shaped, but too still. No swaying, no shivering from the cold, just a statue-like figure standing inches from the glass. The flashlight flickered when it hit the shape, and for the first time that night, Tyler felt real fear in his chest. He turned off the lights, crouched low, and crawled across the floor to the bedroom where his uncle was sleeping. He shook him gently. "Uncle, someone's on the porch." His uncle sat up instantly, as if he had been expecting those words, but instead of telling Tyler to call the police, he whispered, "Don't move, and don't look at it." Tyler stared, breathing hard. "What is it?" His uncle paused before answering. "It's not a man, and it's not here for us. It follows the neighbor's house every year." The porch creaked. Both of them went silent. The sound was slow and heavy. One step, then another, then the faint groan of old wood under weight. Whatever was outside was now standing directly over the front steps. The next sound made Tyler feel sick. The doorknob rattled. Not violently, not like someone trying to break in. It turned slowly, deliberately, like the visitor was politely testing the lock, seeing if it would open. Tyler's uncle gripped his arm and whispered, "Stay still. It won't come inside if we don't react." The cabin stayed silent except for the wind outside. For 10 slow, painful minutes, the figure outside tested every door. First the front, then the side door, then the back entrance. Tyler could hear the soft scraping of heavy boots on the porch boards as the thing circled the cabin. But at no point did it knock or speak or make any sound beyond its footsteps. Finally, after what felt like forever, the footsteps began to fade, moving across the snow, back toward the woods. Tyler dared to look out a tiny gap in the curtain. He saw the footprints,
but they weren't spaced like normal human steps. They were slightly too far apart, like the stride was unnaturally long, and the impressions were deep, heavier than any person he knew. The next morning, Tyler and his uncle went outside to check on Mr. Harlow. Snow was still falling lightly, covering the trees in a white blanket. When they reached the old man's cabin, the front door was wide open. Inside, the place looked like someone had rushed through it in a hurry. Furniture pushed aside, drawers hanging open, belongings knocked to the floor. But there was no sign of Mr. Harlow anywhere. What they did find were the tracks, a single trail of footprints leading from his living room straight out the back door and into the forest. The same kind of tracks Tyler had seen the night before. Authorities searched for days. Nothing was found. And according to Tyler's uncle, the same pattern repeats every Christmas. Heavy footsteps in the snow, slow pacing near the windows, the same tapping at the glass, and every year someone new in the area goes missing. He says that whatever walks through the woods doesn't wander. It chooses.